For most of human history, we had one comfortable assumption. One belief so fundamental that nobody seriously challenged it. It sat quietly underneath our science, our philosophy, our religion, and our entire sense of self-worth as a species. The assumption was deceptively simple. The human mind is the most sophisticated thinking machine that has ever existed on this planet. We built civilizations on that belief. We wrote constitutions around it. We organized medicine, law, education, and ethics based on the unexamined certainty that human cognition was in a category of its own, irreplaceable, unmatched, and ultimately beyond comparison. Then, in a series of laboratories scattered across the United States, Europe, and East Asia, a group of researchers decided to actually test that assumption. They designed experiments with precision. They built benchmarks covering logic, language, working memory, abstract reasoning, emotional recognition, creative thinking, spatial judgment, and real-world problem-solving. They created standardized protocols and invited both human subjects and artificial intelligence systems to sit for the same evaluations. No favoritism, no modified scoring, no different standards, same questions, same time pressures, same rubrics, and then they waited for the results to come back. What they found shocked the researchers themselves, not because the outcome was clear, but because it wasn't, because the picture that emerged was stranger, more layered, and in several ways more philosophically disturbing than either side of the AI debate had predicted. The machine didn't simply win or simply lose. It did something far more complicated and far harder to interpret. Something that forced scientists to reconsider not just artificial intelligence, but what human intelligence actually is, where it comes from, and what it is really for. This is the story of that reckoning. To understand what the researchers found, you first need to understand what they were measuring. And to understand that, you need to go back and look at how we defined the thing we were so certain we possessed. For most of the 20th century, intelligence was treated as a single, measurable quantity, a fixed score, a number that captured everything meaningful about a person's cognitive capacity in one clean digit. The IQ test, originally developed in early 1900s France to identify school children who needed additional academic support, became the dominant framework for understanding the human mind globally. It measured logical reasoning, pattern recognition, verbal fluency, and spatial thinking. And for decades, the scientific establishment accepted this compressed number as though it revealed something real, stable, and complete about a person's ability to think. But cracks began to form in that picture. Psychologist Howard Gardner proposed in 1983 that intelligence wasn't singular at all. He argued it was plural, a collection of distinct capacities including linguistic ability, musical aptitude, spatial reasoning, interpersonal sensitivity, bodily coordination, and more. Then Daniel Goleman brought emotional intelligence into the mainstream in the mid-1990s, arguing that the ability to perceive, interpret, and regulate emotion was its own, legitimate form of sophisticated cognition, and that it predicted success in life better than IQ scores in many contexts. Researchers in developmental psychology began mapping how infants develop intuitive physics, social understanding, and causal reasoning long before any formal education touches them. Cognitive scientists started distinguishing between fast intuitive thinking and slow deliberate reasoning, describing the human mind not as a single engine but as a layered system with multiple competing processes running simultaneously. By the time serious human versus AI comparison research began in earnest, the scientific community had arrived at a troubling realization: we still didn't fully agree on what intelligence was. We had dozens of frameworks, each capturing something real, none capturing everything. We had tests, but every test only measured a slice. The territory was far bigger than any single map. That foundational confusion between the clean metrics we could actually measure and the vast, messy, lived reality of a thinking mind is precisely what the experiments we're about to expose in uncomfortable detail. The first serious alarm came quietly, without press conferences, without dramatic announcements. It arrived in the form of a score on a professional licensing examination. In early 2023, researchers submitted responses generated by a large language model, an AI system trained on hundreds of billions of words of human-written text, to evaluators assessing the United States medical licensing examination. This is among the most rigorous gatekeeping tests in any professional field. Physicians spend years in medical school, followed by additional years of clinical training, before they are considered ready to sit for it. The exam does not simply test memorized facts. It requires nuanced clinical reasoning, diagnostic judgment under ambiguity, the ability to weigh competing evidence, and a sophisticated understanding of how disease presents differently across populations and contexts. The AI passed. Not barely, not at the margin, it scored comfortably within the range that a competent medical graduate would achieve. Simultaneously, comparable results were emerging across entirely different domains. On the law school admission test, the AI placed in the 88th percentile, outperforming the vast majority of human applicants. On a battery of advanced placement examinations spanning physics, history, economics, and computer science, it outscored most high school students who had studied those subjects for years. On the graduate record examination, used for admission to elite postgraduate programs, it performed at a level that would qualify for entry to some of the world's most prestigious universities. On graduate-level biology assessments, it answered questions that stumped doctoral candidates. On bar examinations for legal practice in multiple American states, it passed with scores that would license a human attorney. The pattern was impossible to ignore and difficult to rationalize away. These were not trivial exercises. These were not simplified demonstrations. These were real, consequential examinations built specifically to distinguish trained professionals from novices, to filter those who genuinely understood a field from those who merely knew its surface. And something that had never attended a class, never conducted an experiment, never sat in a lecture hall, and had no lived experience of any kind was clearing those bars with remarkable consistency. But the standardized exams were only the beginning of what the research uncovered. Because passing tests was one thing, what came next was something else entirely. Speed, scale, precision, consistency. In certain categories of cognitive performance, the comparison results were not ambiguous, they were overwhelming. Consider medical imaging. An experienced radiologist, trained for a decade and with years of clinical practice behind them, can detect early-stage lung cancer in a chest scan with an accuracy rate typically falling between 80 and 90% under controlled research conditions. That number represents the best of human expert performance. An AI system trained on hundreds of thousands of labeled scans achieved accuracy rates exceeding 94%. But the performance gap wasn't the only finding that mattered. Equally significant was the behavioral difference in how the two arrived at their conclusions. The radiologist gets tired, performance degrades across a long shift, attention lapses after hours of reviewing normal results. Subtle confirmation biases creep in after seeing patterns that most cases fit. The AI experienced none of that. It reviewed its 10,000th scan with precisely the same focus and precision as its first. In legal document analysis, studies found that human attorneys, trained, experienced, well-compensated professionals, missed relevant contractual clauses, hidden liability, terms, and regulatory violations at rates that would alarm any sophisticated client. AI systems analyzing the same documents identified those issues at significantly higher rates. In pharmaceutical research, AI systems predicted which molecular compounds were likely to bind to protein targets in ways that shortened drug discovery timelines by years. In software engineering, AI tools caught logical errors and security vulnerabilities in code repositories that had passed through multiple rounds of human review. In financial risk modeling, in climate data analysis, in materials science, in field after field, the machine found patterns that trained human experts had walked past. What disturbed researchers most wasn't simply the performance gap. It was the character of it. Because these were not the kinds of tasks we had ever imagined would be vulnerable. These weren't assembly line operations or arithmetic calculations. They were complex, high-stakes cognitive tasks that we had always believed required genuine expert thinking, the ability to hold many variables simultaneously, recognize subtle relationships between them, and draw non-obvious inferences from incomplete information. These were supposed to be the exclusive province of educated, experienced human minds. The benchmarks kept returning a different verdict, and then the research turned to look in the other direction. Strip away the data sets, the standardized exams, and the domain-specific benchmarks, and a very different part of the picture comes into focus. In the domains that have no clean scoring rubric, in the tests that cannot be graded by a spreadsheet, the human mind holds territory that no artificial system has convincingly entered. Researchers presented both human subjects and AI systems with tasks that cognitive scientists call grounded physical reasoning problems. Simple scenarios, the kind that a 4-year-old navigates without effort. How does water behave when you tilt a container slowly versus quickly? What happens when a round object rolls off a surface with a lip versus one without? How does the behavior of a heavy door differ from a light one when pushed at different points along its width? Human children answered these questions effortlessly, drawing on embodied knowledge accumulated through years of touching things, dropping things, falling down, feeling resistance, and learning through physical consequence what the world is made of. AI systems struggled. They could recite the relevant physics. They could describe Newton's laws with perfect accuracy. But their predictions about how actual physical situations would unfold were frequently wrong in ways that revealed the absence at their core. They had never touched anything. They had no body. They had no gravity. They had never once felt the weight of the world. Empathy and social cognition produced similarly stark distinctions. When both human and AI subjects were presented with complex interpersonal scenarios, a person who has just received terrible news and is working hard to appear fine, a colleague whose anger in a meeting is transparently rooted in fear, a stranger who makes a decision that seems irrational but is clearly driven by grief, human subjects demonstrated layered, intuitive comprehension. They read subtext automatically. They registered emotional temperature. They understood what was left unsaid as clearly as what was spoken aloud. AI systems often produced the correct surface-level response. They knew what to say. Researchers who examined the outputs closely, however, consistently observed the same telling gap. The AI was pattern matching its way toward emotionally appropriate language. It was not understanding. It was not feeling. In the most complex, high-stakes social situations, the ones where everything depended on reading the person, not the words, that difference produced real failures in a way that no benchmark score could fully capture. And then there was creativity at its deepest level. Not the creative production that comes from remixing existing forms. AI systems can write poetry, generate visual art, and compose music with genuine aesthetic quality, but something more fundamental. The kind of creative leap that emerges when a person lives through something that has no precedent and finds a new language to describe it, not by drawing on anything they have encountered before, but by reaching somewhere the data cannot reach, into the specific gravity of their own irreproducible experience. Humans generate genuinely novel ideas Because those ideas arise from the intersection of biography, embodiment, loss, wonder, boredom, and time. No machine has lived through time. None of them have felt the strange specific weight of a human life accumulating year by year. When researchers stepped back and considered the complete comparative landscape, not the headline results, not the dramatic wins and losses, but the full architecture of where each form of intelligence excelled and where it fell short, they arrived at a conclusion that was more philosophically significant than most public coverage ever conveyed. Intelligence is not one thing. We had suspected this for decades. The AI comparison gave us proof in a form we had never possessed before: hard empirical evidence organized by domain, by task type, by cognitive mechanism, and by failure. Signature. Human intelligence is embodied, relational, and evolutionary in its origins. It developed not in a laboratory, but across millions of years in environments filled with predators, social hierarchies, unpredictable weather, scarce nutrition, and the constant presence of other minds whose intentions had to be read and anticipated to survive. Our cognition is shaped by that long history in ways we are still mapping. We are extraordinarily capable at the tasks our survival depended on: reading faces with extraordinary nuance, detecting deception, maintaining trust within groups across time, reasoning about physical space through direct experience, and making fast decisions under deep uncertainty with information that is radically incomplete. These are the things we do automatically, below the threshold of conscious effort, with a proficiency that no engineered system has matched. Artificial intelligence is something genuinely different, not inferior in any simple sense, and certainly not superior in any simple sense. Different in nature. It emerged through optimization rather than evolution, trained to minimize error across enormous bodies of human-generated data. Its strengths are exactly what that origin story would predict: vast and rapid knowledge retrieval, pattern recognition operating across scales no human expert can match, complete consistency across time and fatigue, and exceptional performance on tasks with clear, measurable right and wrong answers. Its weaknesses are equally logical: no body, no continuous personal experience, no evolutionary heritage, no accumulated life, and no inner state that shapes its engagement with the world. Framed that way, not as a competition with a winner, but as a mapping of two genuinely distinct cognitive architectures shaped by entirely different forces, the research results stopped being surprising. They became clarifying. They provided a more precise account of both minds than we had possessed before. But the implications of the research extended further than any comparison chart could capture. Because once the mapping was complete, a deeper question emerged, one that nobody in the field had fully anticipated asking when the experiments began. In multiple studies designed to test abstract reasoning, researchers observed something unexpected. The error patterns of human subjects and AI systems showed measurable overlap. When given problems specifically designed to mislead, questions whose surface structure pointed confidently toward a wrong answer, both humans and AI made similar mistakes in similar proportions. The types of logical failure were comparable. The cognitive traps that caught people also caught machines, in ways that went beyond coincidence. This finding was, to some researchers, quietly disturbing. Because if an artificial system trained entirely on human-generated language and thought arrives at human-like reasoning errors through statistical learning, it raises a question that cuts uncomfortably close to the foundations of cognitive science. If we are looking at genuinely similar patterns of failure between two very different systems, what does that suggest about the nature of human reasoning itself? Are our patterns of thought, our logical intuitions, our instinctive sense of what an answer should look like, are these the product of something deeper and more essential than we imagined? Or are they, in some meaningful sense, also a form of accumulated pattern matching, trained into us not through gradient descent on a server farm, but through decades of language, culture, education, and social feedback. The machine did not answer that question. But by performing the way it did, it forced the question into the open in a way that prior decades of cognitive science had never quite managed to do. The implications of this research extend into every domain that matters: education, medicine, law, creative work, national security, economic policy, every field in which human expertise has been the irreplaceable foundation is now navigating a landscape that the comparison research fundamentally altered. We are entering an era in which the cognitive tools we use to extend our thinking are themselves capable of something that resembles thought. That has never occurred before in human history. Every previous tool extended our physical reach: the wheel, the steam engine, the satellite, the surgical instrument. Some tools extended limited dimensions of our cognition in fixed, predictable ways: written language, the printing press, the spreadsheet, the calculator. None of them could respond to complexity with complexity. None of them could generalize across domains, adapt to novel inputs, and produce outputs that genuinely surprised the experts who designed them. The comparison research makes clear that navigating this moment requires something very specific from us. Not fear, which produces paralysis. Not overconfidence, which produces negligence. Not the reassuring narrative that machines will always fall short of us in the ways that count, because the data does not support that comfort, and not the panicked alternative claim that we have already been surpassed and rendered obsolete, because the data does not support that either. What the research demands is honesty, precision, a serious, grounded account of what intelligence is, what it is for, which version of it we are building, and which version of it we must protect as irreducibly human. Because every answer we give to those questions is a design choice. Every assumption we carry about what AI can and cannot do shapes how we build it, how we deploy it, how we regulate it, and how we integrate it into the decisions that govern people's lives. The stakes of getting those answers wrong are not abstract. They are concrete, immediate, and already visible in institutions across the world. There is something quietly profound about what happens when you try to measure a mind by building something that thinks alongside it. When the instrument of investigation is itself a form of the thing being investigated. When the mirror reflects something you recognize and something you don't. Every benchmark the researchers designed was itself a product of human intelligence. Every interpretation of the results passed through human cognition. Every conclusion about what the comparison means was filtered through our own assumptions, our own language, our own categories of what counts as thinking well. Which means that in studying artificial intelligence seriously and rigorously, we were also, always, studying ourselves, holding up a mirror that was more precise than any we had previously constructed, and finding a reflection that was familiar in ways we didn't expect, and strange in ways we weren't prepared for. What the scientists found, across years of comparative research, was not a hierarchy. It was a map of two different forms of intelligence shaped by entirely different forces across entirely different timescales, one sculpted by millions of years of biological survival. In a physical, social, unpredictable world, and one assembled in decades through optimization against the accumulated record of human thought, arriving at overlapping territory. From opposite directions, meeting in the middle of a space neither had fully defined. Standing at the edge of that map, looking across it, we are face to face with the oldest question our species has ever asked itself. What does it mean to think? What does it mean to truly understand something? And what does it mean to be the kind of creature that builds things capable of thinking, and then looks at what it has built, with something very close to wonder and something very close to fear, and asks, with genuine uncertainty that no test has yet resolved whether what we have made is something like ourselves. The researchers ran the experiments. The results came back. And the most important thing they revealed was not a score on any benchmark. It was the question behind the question, the one that no comparison study can answer, but that every one of them makes impossible to avoid. Who are we, now that we are no longer alone in being able to think?